I crossed a line you can't uncross with a polite apology or a box of chocolates left on a doorstep. It's a line drawn in permanent ink, a boundary that, once breached, redefines the entire map of your life. And honestly, it all started with the simplest, quietest air I've ever heard, a single word that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken invitations: stay. It was a challenge disguised as a request, a test of my courage wrapped in the mundane fabric of a Tuesday evening. And in accepting it, I agreed to something far more profound than just passing the time. I agreed to see, and to be seen. Elise Keller had lived in apartment 4B, directly across the hall from my own sad little shoebox, for precisely 11 months and 3 days. I knew this not because I was a stalker, but because I was a cartographer of my own loneliness, and her arrival had been the only significant geological event on my personal timeline in years. In all that time, I barely knew her. My knowledge was a collage of insignificant fragments, unimportant details that my vacant mind collected and catalogued with a bizarre devotion. I knew, for instance, that her coffee, always in the same chipped ceramic mug, inevitably went cold on her windowsill. I'd see it there in the afternoon, a silent testament to a morning's forgotten intentions. I knew that a specific gray cardigan, soft and shapeless, made its appearance every Tuesday, without fail, as if it were a uniform for that particular day of the week. And I knew that sometimes, when she believed the long, echoing hallway was entirely empty, she'd hum a lullaby. It was a fragile, searching melody that never quite found its ending, always trailing off into a sigh before she reached her door, as if she'd forgotten the words or lost the will to finish. I was 22, freshly and unceremoniously bounced from community college by my own impressive, almost weaponized, lack of effort. My life was a study in negative space. My calendar was a blank post-it note stuck to a fridge containing only ketchup and a questionable jar of olives. My days were formless, bleeding one into the next, distinguished only by the shifting quality of the light outside my single window. Most nights, to feel a sense of structure, of order in the universe, I'd just sit on my dusty back steps and time the upstairs hall light. I could see its faint glow reflect off the window of the apartment opposite the courtyard. 11:04 p.m. Off. Every single night. It was my North Star, the only constant in a sea of apathy. Her constancy was an anchor for my own drifting existence. Then one Thursday, the universe decided to nudge us together. My paper grocery bag, overfilled with the lonely essentials of a bachelor's diet, surrendered to physics and split open right in front of her door. A cascade of canned goods rolled across the faded linoleum. Black beans, corn, diced tomatoes, a sad, percussive symphony of my poor life choices. Just as I was about to dissolve into a puddle of pure mortification, her door opened. It didn't creak, it whispered. Elise bent down, her movements slow and deliberate, and scooped up a can of black beans. She examined it for a moment, then looked at me, her eyes holding a flicker of genuine curiosity. "You always buy the low sodium," she observed, her voice softer than I'd imagined. Why? The question was so unexpected, so oddly specific, that my brain short-circuited. My face went hot, a stupid, childish blush. I could feel the heat prickling the back of my neck. I stammered, scrambling to gather the rest of my runaway provisions. Figured I'd be kind to my future self. He'll probably have high blood pressure. To my astonishment, she smiled. It wasn't a polite twitch of the lips, it was a real smile, one that reached her eyes and crinkled the corners, like I'd just handed her a bouquet of wildflowers instead of a dented, generic brand can. It was a smile that made me feel, for a fleeting second, like I wasn't a complete failure. "That's a very thoughtful thing to do for a stranger," she said, placing the can gently into my arms. Then, just as quickly as she'd appeared, she disappeared back inside her apartment. The door didn't slam, it exhaled shut, leaving me alone in the hallway with the ghost of her smile and the faint, lingering scent of lavender. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of the same routine, the same silent observations, the same empty calendar. The only difference was that now, my nightly vigil at the back steps felt less like a scientific observation and more like a strange, one-sided conversation. I'd see her light go out at 11:04 and think, "Good night, Elise," then came the confrontation, if you could call it that. It happened under the aggressive, buzzing fluorescent lights of the communal mailroom, a sterile little box that always smelled of old paper and cleaning fluid. I was fumbling with a key to my mailbox, which was invariably empty save for pizza coupons, when she stepped in front of me, effectively blocking my only path of escape. She was holding a single, plain white envelope. It had no stamp, no return address. It looked sterile, official, and vaguely ominous. "You bolt every time the world gets quiet," she said. It wasn't an accusation, it was a statement of fact, delivered with a calm, unnerving certainty. My denial was immediate and far too loud, echoing in the small, tiled space. "I don't bolt." "You do," she insisted, her gaze unwavering. She tapped the mysterious envelope against her palm, a steady, rhythmic gesture. "The second this hallway gets silent, the second there's no noise to hide in, you dive for your door like it's a bomb shelter. You can't stand the stillness." I had no response. She had seen right through me, right through the flimsy facade of my solitary life to the frantic, panicked hamster wheel of my thoughts. She saw the running. "So here's a dare," she continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing me to lean in slightly. "A simple one. One night, when it's quiet, just stay. Don't run. Just be here." I stared at her, my mind racing. Stay where? Stay how? It was the most cryptic, most compelling challenge I had ever received. I nodded, a jerky, uncertain movement, mostly as a means to end the conversation and get away from the intensity of her perception. I figured she meant hang out by the perpetually broken vending machines or loiter by the elevators. A pointless, harmless act of defiance against my own habits. But that night, as I walked down the hall toward my apartment, my key already in hand, I saw it. Her door was cracked open. Not wide, but just enough to let a sliver of warm, yellow light stretch across the worn hall carpet like a beckoning finger. It was an invitation. My hand trembled as I brought the key toward my own lock. Every instinct screamed at me to go inside, to seek the familiar safety of my four walls, to turn on the TV and drown out the silence she had dared me to face. But the dare echoed in my head, a repeating loop of her voice. "Stay, stay, stay." I stood there for what felt like an eternity, caught between the life I knew and the terrifying, silent promise of the unknown. My knuckles rapped against the wood of her door, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the hushed hallway. It was a soft, hesitant knock, the knock of someone hoping they won't be heard. "Come in," she called out immediately, her voice calm and clear, as if she had been waiting for that exact sound. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Her living room was like stepping into a perfectly preserved photograph from a forgotten decade. It was a museum of a bygone era. A large floral couch, its vibrant pattern faded over the years to a bruised, melancholy purple, dominated the space. The lace curtains were so old and thin you could practically read a newspaper through them, filtering the streetlight into a hazy, dreamlike glow. On a small end table, a cuckoo clock ticked with an obnoxious, cheerful pride, marking each passing second with a crisp, wooden clack. The air smelled of old books, dust motes dancing in the lamplight, and something faintly floral, like dried potpourri. She was sitting in an armchair, that same cold mug of coffee from the morning balanced on her knee. She looked up at me, a faint, knowing look in her eyes. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to the faded couch. "Nothing in here is haunted except your own imagination." So I sat. The cushion sighed under my weight, releasing a puff of dusty air. We didn't talk. We watched the nightly news on a small, boxy television, but she had the volume on mute. The only sound was the proud ticking of the clock and the quiet hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. We just watched the captions flicker across the screen, stories of distant wars, political squabbles, a celebrity scandal. It felt surreal, like we were observing the world from a soundproof capsule. Every now and then, she'd lift the mug to her lips, take a tentative sip of the cold coffee, wince slightly, and set it back down on her knee. It was a ritual of disappointment, repeated over and over. The minutes stretched into an hour. The silence wasn't empty, it was thick, filled with all the things we weren't saying. My own anxiety began to feel like a third person in the room. At precisely 11:04, a little digital chime went off from a small alarm clock on her bookshelf. It was her signal. My signal. "That's my cue," I said, my body already tensing, preparing to stand up and retreat to my own world. It was a reflex. "Not tonight," she murmured, her eyes still fixed on the silent television screen. Her voice was barely audible, but it carried an undeniable weight. "You promised." And just like that, I was tethered. The urge to flee was immense, a physical pull toward the door. But her words held me in place. I sank back into the couch cushions, defeated and strangely relieved. So I stayed. I stayed as the news ended and the screen went to static. I stayed as the cuckoo clock announced midnight with a series of jarring chirps. I stayed, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't run from the quiet. That first night unspooled into a strange and sacred routine. It became our unspoken agreement. 4 or 5 nights a week, I would find her door cracked open, and I would enter. The dare had been a one-time thing, but my staying became a habit. Night after night, I learned her small, meticulous rituals, the way she ironed cloth napkins into intricate origami shapes that she never used, or how she could peel an entire orange in one long, perfect spiral, the peel cascading down like a bright orange ribbon. She organized her spice rack alphabetically and turned all the labels on her canned goods to face forward. Her world was one of quiet, controlled order. But the real story, the chaotic heart of all that order, was hidden in a simple brown shoebox kept under the coffee table. It was scuffed at the edges, held together by a fraying rubber band. For weeks it was just part of the scenery. Then one evening, as we sat in our usual silence, she pushed it towards me with her foot, a small, deliberate nudge across the threadbare rug. "Read it, if you want," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Everyone else has. Just don't get sad on my behalf. I've run out of room for other people's pity." My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. I slipped off the rubber band and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled amongst a few faded photographs, was a thick sheaf of legal documents. Divorce papers. They were dated 3 years prior. I unfolded the top page. Her signature, Elise Marie Keller, was written in a careful, precise cursive. His signature, a scrawled, aggressive slash of ink, slanted hard to the right, as if it were trying to run off the page and escape the commitment it represented. I read a few lines, words like irreconcilable differences and dissolution of marriage. They felt cold and clinical, a stark contrast to the lived-in warmth of her apartment. I carefully folded the papers back along their original creases and placed them back in the box, closing the lid. "Feels heavier than paper," I said, my voice hoarse. She finally looked away from the window and met my eyes. A wry, sad smile touched her lips. "That's guilt," she answered, her voice soft. "It's dense stuff. Comes with its own gravity." She explained that he had left, not with a bang, but with a note on the kitchen counter next to a half-eaten apple. The ultimate act of quiet cowardice. She had spent the first year blaming him, the second year blaming herself, and the third year just feeling tired. And we just let that hang in the air between us, the dense, heavy truth of her loneliness and my own. In her quiet apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of a shared life, my own rudderless existence suddenly felt a little less pathetic and a little more human. It was a Friday, the kind of night where the weather has its own personality. A relentless, angry rain was throwing itself against the windows, the wind howling a mournful song through the old window frames. The sound cocooned us, separating the small, warm living room from the churning world outside. The air was thick with the smell of rain and damp earth. Recognizing a chill that had crept into the room, Elise disappeared for a moment and returned from a back room with 2 blankets. They were old and well-worn, one a patchwork quilt and the other a simple navy blue wool. She held the wool one out to me. As I reached for it, my knuckles brushed against hers. It shouldn't have been anything, a fleeting, accidental contact. But it was like a static shock, a sudden jolt of unexpected warmth that shot up my arm. We both froze, our hands hovering in the small space between us. My breath caught in my throat. In that split second, the air crackled with a new kind of tension, something that had nothing to do with the storm outside. She pulled her hand back quickly, her eyes darting away. I took the blanket, the wool feeling rough against my suddenly sensitive skin. Hours passed. We sat under our separate blankets, on opposite ends of the couch, the unspoken energy of that touch creating a chasm between us. I could still feel the ghost of it on my hand, a tingling warmth. The ticking of the clock seemed to grow louder, each second a drumbeat marking our shared silence. 11 came and went. The chime from her alarm clock sounded, but neither of us acknowledged it. Finally, long after midnight, she spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper, directed at the rain-streaked windowpane. Ever want to do something you know you shouldn't, just to feel what it's like? To just step off the path for a minute? My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew she wasn't talking about jaywalking. The question hung in the air, heavy and fragile. All the time, I said, and the words felt truer and more real than anything I had said in years. They felt like a confession. The room just breathed with us then. The rain fell. The clock ticked. Neither of us moved. My mind screamed at me to say something more, to close the distance, to reach out again, this time on purpose. But I was a coward, paralyzed by the fear of shattering the delicate, strange peace we had built. I watched her profile, the way the lamplight caught the curve of her cheek, and I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that if I stayed, something would have to break. We were folding laundry. Her laundry. A few nights after the storm, I had arrived to find a basket of warm, clean clothes sitting in the middle of the living room floor. It was the most domestic, most intimate scenario I could have possibly imagined. The room was filled with the clean, comforting scent of fabric softener. Without a word, I had sat on the floor opposite her and picked up a towel. We worked in a comfortable rhythm, folding socks, towels, her soft cotton shirts. It felt natural, a simple shared task that needed no explanation. "You're folding my jeans like they're made of glass," she teased, her voice gentle. She was right. I was holding a pair of her denim jeans with a kind of reverence, creasing them with absurd precision. I tried to look casual, snapping the denim in a way I hoped looked confident and experienced, but my hands betrayed me. I was clumsy, all sharp angles and nervous energy. As I reached for another shirt, she caught my wrist. Her fingers were cool against my skin, her grip surprisingly firm. "Look at me." Her voice was quiet, but it was a command. I lifted my head from the pile of laundry and met her gaze. Her eyes, which I had always thought of as simply brown, seemed to hold the entire history of that quiet apartment, all the lonely nights, the cold coffee, the unspoken grief. They were filled with a profound weariness, but also a flicker of something else, something wild and uncertain. "I'm 45, she whispered, and the number hung in the air between us, a stark, undeniable fact. Her voice was barely there, thin and shaky. "This is a little reckless. I'm divorced, and I'm lonely, and my life is a collection of quiet routines." "You're 22, I finished for her, my own voice just as unsteady. I didn't let her finish whatever else she was going to say. I didn't want to be defined by my youth or my failure. Also lonely. And, apparently, really bad at laundry. A laugh escaped both of us at the same time. It wasn't a happy sound, it was thin and fragile, laced with tension and the absurdity of our situation. Then, just as quickly, it faded, and the silence rushed back in to fill the space. She didn't let go of my wrist. Her thumb stroked the back of my hand, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a fresh jolt through my entire body. She looked right at me, her eyes searching mine, and she said it again, softer than a whisper, the word that had started it all. "Stay." This time, there was no ambiguity. This time, I knew with every fiber of my being that she didn't mean on the couch. She meant stay here, in this moment, with her. It wasn't a dare anymore. It was a plea. I crossed the room. It felt more like crossing an ocean. My pulse was a frantic, panicked drum against my ribs, a primal warning system I had no intention of heeding. The small space that had always existed between us, that safe buffer of propriety and circumstance, disappeared with 2 short steps. I knelt on the floor in front of her chair, the pile of half-folded laundry forgotten beside us. The next thing I knew, the cuckoo clock on the wall was chiming midnight, then 1, then 2, ticking away minutes like they were loose change it was carelessly discarding. The world outside, with its traffic and sirens and distant shouts, had gone completely silent, erased by the intensity of what was happening inside apartment 4B. We were on that floral couch, its bruised purple fabric soft against my back. The blankets from the rainy night were tangled on the floor. Her hair, which always seemed so perfectly contained, was loose, tickling my chin. The air was thick with the scent of her, lavender and clean cotton and something uniquely her own. I had imagined this moment would be fraught with anxiety and awkwardness, a collision of 2 lonely planets. Instead, it felt like a homecoming. It was a quiet, desperate exploration, a mapping of new territory in the dark. It was the antithesis of the frantic, fumbling encounters of my youth. This was slow. This was intentional. This was 2 people finding a temporary shelter in each other. Hours later, tucked into the curve of my arm, she mumbled into my chest, her voice thick with sleep and something else. I should feel awful about this. Do you? I asked, my own voice a low rumble against her ear. She was silent for a long moment, so long that I thought she had fallen asleep. Her breathing was a steady, warm presence against my ribs. Then, she shifted slightly and said, "Not yet. Not yet." The words echoed in the quiet room. It was an admission that the guilt, the regret, the self-recrimination, was waiting for her just outside the door, in the harsh light of morning. But for now, in the dark, it was being held at bay. I waited for my own wave of guilt to hit me, that heavy, suffocating feeling of doing something wrong, of taking advantage or breaking some unspoken social contract. But it never came. There was only the solid weight of her against me, her steady breathing, and a profound, overwhelming sense of rightness. For the first time, I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And I stayed. The first light of dawn filtered through her thin lace curtains, transforming them into panes of cheap, beautiful stained glass, painting streaks of orange and pink across the living room floor. The world was slowly coming back into focus. I woke up alone on the couch, a blanket draped over me. For a panicked second, I thought I had dreamed it all. Then, the rich, promising smell of brewing coffee reached me from the kitchen. She was at the counter, her back to me. She was wearing the gray cardigan, even though it wasn't a Tuesday. The coffee maker hissed and gurgled, and the steam curled up from the pot like a question mark. She didn't seem to notice I was awake. She moved with a quiet efficiency, her motions economical and familiar. "Toast?" she asked, without turning around. The question was simple, domestic, and utterly perfect. I could only manage a nod, my throat tight with a dozen unformed emotions. She brought over 2 plates, 2 mugs of steaming coffee, real, hot coffee, and a small jar of marmalade. We ate in a comfortable, profound silence, punctuated only by the scrape of knives on toast and the clink of mugs against the coffee table. The butter melted into the soft parts of the bread, and the silence felt more intimate than any conversation we'd ever had. She wasn't looking at me, but I felt seen. "Next Thursday," she said out of nowhere, her voice steady as she stared into her coffee mug, "I'm driving up the coast for the weekend. To a little town called Albion. It's quiet there." I chewed, and I swallowed. The piece of toast felt like a rock in my throat. My mind was a blank slate, unable to process the implication. She glanced at me then, a quick, almost shy look from under her eyelashes. She added, want to come? That is, if you think you can handle all that quiet with me, without the benefit of four walls between us. I felt a grin spread across my face, a real one, the first of its kind in weeks, maybe years. It wasn't a smirk or a polite smile, it was a pure, unadulterated expression of joy, of relief, of a future I hadn't allowed myself to imagine. It was the feeling of a locked door finally swinging open. "I think I can manage," I said, and my voice was clear and strong. We left the breakfast dishes in the sink. We left the cuckoo clock on the wall, ticking away its seconds with its stupid, cheerful pride. We left the shoebox full of dense, heavy guilt right where it was, its lid shut tight on a past that was hers, but not ours. We walked out of her apartment and into the bright, morning light of the hallway together. I never told her I loved her, not in words. The word felt too big, too loud for the quiet space we had built. Love was a promise, a declaration. What we had was something more fragile and, perhaps, more real. It was a shared presence. But every night after that, when the hallway fell into that familiar hush, I didn't wait for the crack in the door. I just knocked. And every night, the door opened. I stayed. And she never had to ask me again. So, what's the quietest, biggest risk you've ever taken? What was the dare you didn't even know you were accepting until it was too late? Let me know in the comments below. I read them all, and I want to hear your stories. And if you want more stories that sneak up on you, that find the extraordinary in the ordinary, hit that subscribe button and maybe the notification bell. The door is always cracked open.